Hi, everyone. Yep, as you're seeing in the chat, we'll be kicking off in just a few seconds. Just want to give folks a chance to come into the room. Welcome, welcome. All righty, we'll go ahead and kick off, and folks will come on in. So, hi everyone, and welcome to our FEMA webinar today, evaluating data management capabilities in M&A due diligence, sponsored by Affinity. Thank you for joining us. My name is Daniel Davidson. I'm a virtual conference producer in the FEMA space, and today we're in for a very informative, insightful conversation with our esteemed panel. Our panelists will introduce themselves in more detail as they kick off their conversation, but I would just like to briefly introduce them now. So please join us in welcoming Julia Bardmesser, the Senior Vice President, Head of Data, Architecture and Salesforce Development at Voya Financial, Jeremy Herzog, Director of Product Marketing at Affinity, and John Bottega, President of the EDM Council. And please, just as a reminder, there's just a very quick 1-minute survey at the end of the webinar, so please stick around. And with that, I'll turn it over to my colleague, Randy, to get us started today.
Hello, everyone. My name is Julia Bardmesser, and I'm a head of enterprise data, architecture, and CRM at Voya Financial. And today we wanted to talk about a topic that's near and dear to my heart, and also the one that I haven't heard explored in detail in any of the conversations I've been on in the industry. And I have a wonderful group of people here to discuss it with. And I would just let them introduce themselves first before I go further into the topic. John, do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. Thanks, Julia. Thanks for having me as part of the panel. I'm John Bottega, the president of the EDM Council. We're a nonprofit professional trade association that caters to the data management professional with education and best practices. And brief background, as a former chief data officer early on in 2006, when the role was just being created at Citi, spent time with the Federal Reserve and the U.S. Treasury in that role, and with Bank of America, and now president of the EDM Council. Happy to be here.
Very happy to have you here, John. Jeremy, would you like to introduce yourself?
Hey everyone, thanks for having me as well. I'm Director of Product Marketing at Affinity.co. We are a relationship intelligence platform built around the private capital and financial services industry, serving as the CRM platform for all deal makers, and excited to be here. Thank you very much.
Yeah. Thank you, Jeremy. It's great to have you here as well. So we'll talk about, so nobody argues. It's kind of a accepted truth about that data is an engine nowadays that fuels the growth of the company. That how companies manage data, define, it's a foundational ability to do everything, starting with robust regulatory reporting and financial reporting to efficient operations, straight-through processing, to monetization such as creation of the new product, effective distribution, effective marketing. However, in what happens when companies look to buy other companies? So if you have an M&A situation, mergers and acquisitions, if you have PE company or VC company looking to invest, data capabilities. So if data is so very important, should the ability to make data useful and usable within the company be considered as part of the due diligence when either if you're a big company looking to buy another one, or you're a PE firm or VC firm, should you look at data capabilities and what are the pluses and minuses of doing so? So I'm gonna throw it out to John and Jeremy. What do you think? Is it worthwhile to look at how people manage data before you look at buying a company?
Sure, I'll jump in. Some years ago, there was a TV program where the contestants had to guess what the value was inside the briefcase. Doing an M&A without understanding the value and the capabilities of data management is kind of similar, right? You can't, why would you buy something not knowing what that value is, what the capability of managing that asset is. I mean, data is an asset, it has value, but how are they managing that asset? Are they applying it to, to market growth or to expanding revenue or whatever it might be? So to me, to ignore that in an M&A evaluation just would seem silly, especially now that we see, as you started in your opening, the importance of data to an organization's health.
Yeah, I mean, that's actually a very good comparison. It's not only what's inside the briefcase, but do you actually have keys to that briefcase? Can you open the briefcase? So to make it a little bit more, you can have, quite often when companies merge, you buy a new company, so you have access to market share. So market share is access to the customers. What does access to the customers actually mean? It means that you have data about those customers. So if you're buying a company, and so you're buying data about their customers and ability to distribute and market to them. But if that data is locked in a legacy COBOL system, good luck. I mean, they're definitely customers. It's going to be really difficult. It's going to be expensive to extract that data and to make it usable. Jeremy, I know that you provide a lot of information in terms of when companies go through that. Do you see that as well?
Absolutely. I would say that, when you're looking at a potential opportunity, you should analyze a company's and their data capabilities, just like, keep it to the same standard as you keep your own company. Your own company should probably be having very clean data, good best practices with data management on your own firm. And you'd want to have that, quality reflected in the companies that you're looking at, because it's very important to be looking at specific insights on potentially, employee growth or recent hires or, revenue stagnation, to kind of use these as signals to apply to your evaluation of what a company is worth and if it's worth pursuing.
Yeah. So when you look at the company in M&A, you talk a lot about synergies. And there is synergy on the expense side, which means are there expenses that are to a certain degree duplicated, that if the companies merge, expenses can come down. But there are also synergies on the growth side. So the companies, if they fit together, can they grow? Is the total bigger than the sum of its parts? Do you see that? Like, how do you see data capabilities playing into both growth or expense synergies?
Well, Julia, I think I think you just hit the two sides of the coin there, right? There's a defensive posture that you have to take in that M&A, and there's an offensive posture that you have to take. And in particular, I think if we're saying in general it's not being addressed, but if there's anything addressed, usually the defense is not being addressed, right? First, you look and say, we're acquiring this company. I want their customer database because that's value to me. I can reach out to those customers, right? Beyond that, though, what's the market share? How do you penetrate the markets? That would be one aspect. What probably is even less viewed of the risks associated with the data assets on that particular firm. There might be PII information. There might be information related to financial positions or financial exposures that introduce risk. So you're acquiring a company, and in the case of, say, a financial firm, if you have financial assets tied to certain, whether indices or whatever it might be, or market conditions, what's my exposure to those assets? Now, yes, a finance review would do most of that, but again, we learned through a number of events in the industry, if you don't understand the data, how do you assess the financial value, right? So you have to tie those two together and really dig into the data assets and sources to really assess, again, both offense and defense. Here's the opportunities we have in the market, but here's the risk we have to assume, and are we properly positioned to address those risks?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. PI is a really big risk, especially as companies move more and more to the cloud. And one of the things you would buy, you would buy cloud capabilities and cloud native capabilities. PI data and how it's been managed that risk and that exposure becomes the risk and exposure of the company that buys it. There is also the whole records management, right? Discipline, which is the company holding too much data, not enough data. So that needs to be looked at as well, because that also becomes a risk to the company that's the acquiring company.
I mean, before Jeremy jumps in, a quick story, and it's a real life story. My brother was selling his house. The mortgage was sold to another bank. When he had to satisfy the mortgage, they could not find the original paperwork. He was financially satisfying the mortgage. They could not execute the deal because they couldn't find the original paperwork, and that's records management.
Yes.
So
especially as banks have bought. I have a story from a friend of mine that's also very similar. You know, mortgages get bought and bought and bought, and then companies merge, and there is a paper somewhere, and nobody knows where the paper is, and you can't sell the place.
And needless to say, he's not doing business with that bank anymore, right? So
yeah,
it damages your customer relationships and your position in the market.
Absolutely, that resonates a lot with a lot of the folks that we're interacting with. It's very clear that data is most useful when it's complete, it's accessible, and it's accurate. And that goes for any company you're going after, or in investment banking themselves. That applies to as you're managing relationships. For example, in a CRM, it can be frustrating to try to get up to speed before a prospect call when you're digging through incomplete, siloed data. You might have to go run down the hall. Well, that's happening less these days in a virtual world. But tapping on someone's shoulder that might have talked to them last. Clean data, we all want that, and it's really essential to having the full picture of a company and your own as well.
Jeremy, you bring up something interesting, and you kind of glance at it and says it isn't happening. It is. They do still run down the hall looking for data.
Okay.
But we have another data asset, and that's unstructured, right? How many firms now have customer recordings, phone recordings or tweets or text messages, or whatever it might be? That's really, really valuable information, because you can kind of get a sense of where is the company positioned to the public. There are a lot of negative things out there. And if you don't have access to that information, you could be walking into a situation going, oh, everybody loves us, and maybe not the case. Or, this particular aspect is not well liked, right? So you need to have access to that as well. And that's probably, Drew, that's probably the toughest if you think about evaluating data set, unstructured data set that floats all over an organization.
Oh yeah, yep. And some of it is whether it's accessible or not. So when in M&A, you spend a lot of time trying to figure out how much it's going to take you to actually integrate with the systems. So a lot of companies grew, and a lot of the jobs I've had over the years are because the companies grew by acquisition. Data got never in, the technology and data life stacks never got integrated, and you don't know where data is coming from. That's kind of a story quite often across several jobs that I've had. So integration is really important for the functioning of the new company. How easy is it to integrate? That's also data capability. Do you have API-based integration? And I don't want to get too technical here, but or is it you're still sending files around, right? And you have thousands of files with different formats, with repeatable data, repeated data of different quality. So there is also a cost associated in understanding data capabilities of the company you're buying, because it would help you either spend lots more money on integrating before getting any value out of acquisition, or you can start deriving value, extracting value much, much faster if you have a much more modern data capabilities. And that actually goes to price, right? Because you price the deals. So that goes into how much money you're willing to pay. If you're a private equity company, that's also very important, because price is important. And then venture capital investment, that's kind of a totally different story. So how is it part of technology? Jeremy, you mentioned around cleanliness of data. So data quality, data lineage, understanding where the data comes from, where it lives. a lot of it is the business data capability. It's not technology, it's not the databases that you have, it's not your data structures. It's actually, do you have business stewardship established? Is that also something that you should look at when you're looking into buying of the company?
Absolutely. I mean, we're seeing, a lot of our users are relying more and more on, their collective network across the firm to find, warm introduction opportunities to kind of up your batting average, to use a sports analogy, to, break through the noise of the competition. And we're actually seeing that, users are taking less meetings, are sending less emails, and their time to close is decreasing. They're actually getting more potential buyers per mandate. And it's more, having that clean awareness of where those opportunities lie, and you're able to focus your resources and efforts on those high probability acquisition opportunities. So we're seeing that, you could say there's less cold outreach, less time spent taking any old meeting and focusing on quality and not quantity. And that's been showing value to Affinity users as far as like working smarter and less hard, if you will.
John, what do you think around that, like business stewardship, and how do you look at it?
Well, are you referring to the business stewardship or just the technology related to it? What's the
just no, I'm talking more about, so again, going back, that if you look at the company to buy, you look at the data capabilities and availability of data, being able to access the data. The big thing around data quality is that business ownership, business stewardship. That's also a capability of the company. So is that something that you would look at?
Yeah, I think, again, data is very systemic, as we know, right? So I think everybody recognizes now that we're not in a little box over here, that we touch everything. So I think early on you mentioned data quality. Well, that's just the outcome of business process, right? So if the company you're acquiring has gaps in their business processes, you're not going to have very good data, right? Access to the data leads to your stakeholders being creative in how they acquire data, right? So now we have, islands of data being created all over the place. So yeah, if you're really going to do an evaluation of the information asset, you have to look broader than just the databases. Your point, you have to look at the business processes. You have to look at the management structure. Is this a, director from senior executives, or is it a army of heroes, in little silos of information? So I don't see how you could possibly separate the two, really, in doing that proper information evaluation.
Yeah. Actually, you bring a very good point around people. So when I was thinking, one thing is when you're evaluating large companies where you have a lot of technology and business processes being built. But if you're a VC and you're investing in early-ish, like not early, but maybe slightly later stage of the company, you don't have that much built out yet. So what do you look at? And one of the things I was thinking that is really important as a kind of decide whether or not the company is going to manage data thoughtfully and well and proactively, not just an outcome of the business process, but data-centric management of technology and the business. If you have a smaller company, if it's a venture capital type of situation, you look at the people, you look at the CEO, at the founders, and you see whether or not there is understanding of importance of data capabilities and the roadmap and the plan of how, even through the period of high growth and a lot of demand on time and not enough resources, right, the startup situation, they still will put emphasis on appropriate data management, put enough foundational work to be able to pay off later. John, are you seeing any of that as well? Like, is that an appropriate focus if you have a asset VC type of situation? That's like you mostly look at the people. Do they get it?
That's a big messy problem. Okay, because you're really talking about the culture,
right?
If the culture of the organization is information oriented, I would say you would have a good feeling going in that acquisition to have confidence in the information that's being managed. If it's not that you would walk away from an acquisition, but you have to be cognizant of that before going in, right? Again, there's the defense and the offense, right? In that case, that would be a defense reaction. What's the culture of the organization? Are they a data-driven organization? Do they value information? Do they just fire the last 10 data people? I mean, you have to get a sense of what they're thinking in terms of how they manage the asset. The flip side of it is what's untapped. I remember talking to a firm that did a fantastic job in capturing transactions, and I don't mean financial transactions. I mean like point of purchase transactions, and then did nothing with that data. Mm-hmm. You could tap into that data. You can see patterns. You can reach out to customers. You can grow the company. They didn't do any of that. So not that that's, you're acquiring the company, but hey, now we have a whole series of untapped value, right? Again, both sides of the coin. What's the culture? Be aware of it. What's the untapped opportunity? Be aware of it.
Yeah.
John, I was just going to note, you brought up a good point on, what are their business practices around data, and we've seen, luckily, technology is more and more kind of helping with this struggle of being a good data analyst, being a good steward of your data. And, we're seeing, a lot of Affinity users are, feel comfortable and feel comforted, with this automated data capture that is, they don't have to worry about this manual process of making sure they're logging every email or meeting on their calendar, or even Zoom calls, being able to kind of rely on technology to kind of auto ingest that and place it in the tools that you use on a daily basis, whether that's in your CRM or an ability to kind of review that in your email inbox. That has done a lot of good for those firms that are like having a hard time keeping that data clean and managing it. And it's one of our principles here at Affinity to kind of help with,
Jeremy,
with that.
And I'm sure you've seen this too. There could be, for example, it could be a great client onboarding tool, but there are about 20 of them at the organization, all good tools, right? So now we've got good tools, but the firm is not using them in the right way. So you create those silos, right? So, a tool is only as good as the knowledge of the user and the broad perspective. So I'm sure you see that as well, right? Technology is absolutely fantastic in this space, but people could still misuse the tool and not leverage its capabilities, and actually it becomes a negative. Right? Yeah. So
absolutely, very good point. And I think we've seen the fact, for example, that this type of information is automatically captured and surfaced in your CRM, for example, that actually does have a positive effect on the adoption, only because, hey, you kind of don't have to think about it. It's there. And as long as that business is teaching, the users that, hey, we still want you to check in on, an opportunity's engagement history to make sure that you're speaking accurately. As long as you're asking that user to use the product, it is a relatively light lift for them to find that data, to leverage that in their daily work. But you're right. It does go back to, you can't just buy the tool and forget it. you want to make sure that it's used.
You have to integrate. You have to integrate data literacy, right, on top of the tool sets, right? Or else, you know, I know my own experience once using one of those gigantic augers to dig holes to put a fence in, and I guess I didn't read the instruction where it says if you hit a root, there I went flying across the backyard, right? So I wasn't the, you know, I didn't read the instructions of the tool, and it could be a problem, right? So the people have to be cognizant of how to use these things.
Right. And the easier the tool is to use, obviously the better. And hopefully that adoption and usage friction reduces if it's not rocket science to use that data or use that tool. Absolutely.
Yeah. So I think we're in complete agreement with each other that data is really important. Data capabilities, just having the data, having access to data, understanding risks and capabilities of the data is very important when you're looking to buy in a company or invest in a company. It doesn't, the reason it's not being done, it's not only because people may not have thought about it, but also it's really hard to do. Because how do you know from the outside what are the data capabilities? What's going to help you realize potential of the merger and what's going to get in the way? What are the efficiencies? What are the expense synergies and what are the growth synergies? So there are there framework out there that can be used for that purpose? Is the additional data that can be brought in from the outside, from external, to look at it, or is that just a sense of coming in and asking lots of questions? But again, I think, for example, John, I was looking at DCAM from that perspective, and I think that could be really useful as a framework, what questions to ask and how to rank the answers and also how to assign value. Do you think I'm overreaching where DCAM helps or not? Or do you want to talk a little bit about DCAM as well? Because
not at all.
The
DCAM, the Data Capability Assessment Model, is a framework that was developed by the council about 7, 8 years ago, with lots of contributions from industry to look at all of the capabilities you need to have a well-dressed data management program, right? And the adoption in industry has been one of to use as a benchmark. You know, where am I in that journey? What things do I have to improve on? It's not a maturity model per se, because in maturity models, usually you can reach a certain level and say, I'm okay, right? With the DCAM, this is the capability: data governance, data quality, you know, data architecture. You have to achieve it. I mean, there's no shortcomings there, right? You have to achieve data governance to have an effective data program. So this framework is being used by organizations in preparation for, say, internal audits, in preparation for regulatory reviews. Firms are using it to establish their programs. So, and what's nice about it, being a trade association, it's a neutral model, right? So it's not, you know, heavy weighted towards an industry or a firm or whatever. For models like that, and there are others out there, but of course I'm, you know, biased to our own, right? The one we developed. But clearly, if that were part of the pre-acquisition process, right? Let's really get an assessment of your data program by going through this set of analyses. You know, where are you on your data strategy, your data governance implementation? How are you employing data ethics in your selection of data and use of analytics? You know, all of these things are part of the overall data program, and frameworks like that, I think, are invaluable to that analysis.
Do you think, John, that would help identify like integration, for example? So integration, you know, again, having had experience I've had in the industry, being able to integrate with the technical stack of a company is a big deal when you're buying the company. So does DCAM, like beyond data governance and data lineage and data quality, would it be also indicative of the ease or complexity of integration? And would it help to adjust the pricing and that, you know, people acquiring company wants to pay?
Well, I'll let Jeremy answer to the technical side, but what DCAM does is it actually kind of, it doesn't dictate the technology. Instead, it asks questions like, do you have a golden copy of information? If the answer is no, well, now you have to think about evaluating your current inventory of sources. You have multiple customer databases. Combined with technology, how do I weed through all of that? How do I, avoid the duplications of the erroneous data in one database versus another? Goes back to your question about processes. And I will conveniently punt to Jeremy now on this because I know there's lots of tools in that space that can get you there. I certainly have some of my own in mind, but Jeremy, I'm sure you're seeing that in the work you do.
Yeah, so in the world of CRMs, data reconciliation is a huge pain point. It can be very expensive and resource intensive to handle. So again, like going back to relying on technological solutions that can help automatically address these types of issues, whether that's auto reconciliation, or at least the tool can identify that there might be a potential duplicate and surfacing that proactively and allowing you to take an action, whether to keep the duplication if there's a slight difference or completely eliminate. So we're seeing that more and more. And again, that ties back to if you can auto ingest unique data automatically. So you're not having to think about ingesting the same thing twice. It will be a unique piece of data each time. For example, in an interaction via email or phone, that type of interaction will not have any risk of duplication. But if you're ingesting some data from an external source, for example, into your proprietary system of record, you'll definitely want to have a auto reconciliation solution, and they're out there and very useful to firms that are dealing with this type of issue.
Well, the merger and acquisition also includes the merging of the data assets.
Yes.
And how many times have I seen over the course of my career large firms where the staff still has their acrylic cubes of their original company on their desk because they never combine the databases, they never combine the systems. And in many cases, they're actually running separate infrastructures, even after the companies merge, right?
Yeah.
It's efficient, it's risk prone, and it's also, you miss opportunity. How many times have you heard those stories of, in banking where you have a high net worth valued customer and they deny the daughter's credit card because they never connected the two, right? And then the high net worth value says, you know what, you don't treat me as a family, I'm out of here, right? That comes down to that merging of data so you can see the 360 view of the customer.
Yeah.
And tools like you just referred to.
Yeah, and that's part of the considerations, right? What is going to take to bring the data together? Because that's part of the expense of the merger. That's also a big consideration during when you buy it and when you price the company. So going back a little bit to the theme of, so you're looking from the outside in, and you don't really get to go and run data profiling on the data that you have. You have to ask questions in a way that people can answer in 2-3 hour at the most meetings that you have with usually not the developers. You usually have meetings with the CIO or heads of technology functions, and you need to be able to look at it. Is there, Jeremy, in your experience, is there any data that's available from the outside externally that can help if I have a EPE firm and I want to evaluate what's going on with the data, and I don't really have an ability to go look at the data physically, and run it through my tooling? Is there anything on the market, data available externally about the company that can help you determine how are they doing with the data capability? Maybe it's sentiment analysis. I'm just reaching here. Like, that's the question.
I would say one area that could be very useful in this type of use case would be monitoring we provide data around recent hires. So you could be looking at, has a data analyst been recently hired, or is there a chief data officer of some kind that they have in the company that is, spearheading the strategy and making sure that best practices are implemented. And that could be a very, big indicator whether, how many analysts they have or how recent they've invested in this area of their business. That can be a very strong indicator without actually going in and trying to access their data tools and quality before you actually close the deal.
I think that's a really good indicator. Just seeing whether they're like hiring history and of hiring and exits history as well, right? So there is bringing people in and there is exiting of the people, and that tells you something about what's going on. One more consideration I'm thinking in terms of the framework and adoption. So, John, I haven't spent as much time with the cloud framework that EDM Council created. And it's probably some of it a little bit for my own education. Do you think that's useful in evaluating what data capabilities and cloud capabilities? Again, as a framework, what questions do you ask and what do you look for?
So the council, as you're referring to, Julia, developed a complement to the DCAM called the CDMC, Cloud Data Manager Capability Framework. It's if you think of DCAM as foundational data management, what's the Gretzky expression? You don't skate to the puck, you skate to where the puck is going to be, right? Where are we going to be in the next 2, 3, 5 years? And that's cloud.
Yes.
Right. So again, are you acquiring a firm that's backwards in its technology, or is more innovative in their use of cloud, multi-cloud, hybrid cloud environments? This model takes, as I kind of referred to, the concept of data management and says, okay, how are you applying that now to your cloud assets? Are you running a hybrid or multi-cloud environment? Are you taking into consideration ubiquitous cataloging across them, access to that data, multi-jurisdictional residency of data across different jurisdictions where you could have risk associated with it? Again, that's another exposure, right? You acquire a company, find out they have a cloud implementation where there's data in a restricted country, right?
Yeah, especially internationally, because there's such a patchwork of regulation that especially with the cloud servers could be anywhere. Yeah.
So what that model does is it again walks you through those capabilities needed and talks about how do you leverage cloud going forward. But again, even similar to, what are a firm's AI and ML capabilities too? Again, thinking forward, thinking value to your, why you're acquiring them. You're hoping that you buy a factory that's building the next model car, not the one before.
That's true. Jeremy, have you come across a lot of now of buying or mergers and acquisition of the cloud native companies? And is there anything there that you see in terms of how can you assess, are they using the cloud-based technologies effectively? Is it like plus or minus? Like presumably you want to buy a cloud native company because that's where they're all going. But there are good ways to be on the cloud, and there are not so good ways to be on the cloud. So do you see any data that allows you to look at that as well? Or is that going back to personnel and hires of resources data?
Yeah, I think that those insights will come in the due diligence phase through asking the right questions. There's also ways to do a fair amount of research on a company's tech stack through their website as well. So I think, the way a potential acquisition target leverages technology is definitely something that's very front of mind to private equity, investment banking professionals. Again, to John's point, I think it's very consistent that someone would like to acquire a forward-thinking company that's using up-to-date technology or kind of best-in-class tools. And I would say that's data right now that's captured through quality due diligence and making sure that you're making the best use of the meetings that you hold with that prospect.
That sounds like really good way to look into what's going on within the company. So we have a few minutes left. Any last words, John? Like, what would you, if you were to give, let's say, okay, so the last question, let's say you're being hired or not hired, but as an advisor during M&A process. What would be your advice to the acquiring company? What should they look at? How they should structure that look?
Well, I think we hit all the points. I think more importantly is you got to do it. An information evaluation and all of the aspects we talked about has to be part of the M&A pre-process, has to be. And I think it's not done in some cases. Or I don't know what percentage out there doesn't do it, but you really don't want to, open your eyes on day one of the new merged company and find out you have all of this baggage and all of these problems, right? These are important things that should be evaluated up front.
Yeah, I think it's not done in majority of the cases, at least based on my very unscientific poll of people who've been involved in that. And yeah, you just got to do it. And yes, it's not simple, but there are tools available even now that we've discussed that allow you to get there better. And you don't want to have, it's nice to have a pleasant surprise, such as a very detailed transaction history or events history, John, as you mentioned, that can be now leveraged. But more often than not, it's going to be an unpleasant surprise. Right. Jeremy, from your perspective, what would be your advice or guidance if you were employed as a consultant in that situation or advisor in that situation?
Yeah, and I would say it just goes back to having as clear a picture of a prospect as possible, and that that these surrounding signals of a company that you can get through third-party sources or your own proprietary knowledge through your network, maybe tapping into a subject matter expert in this case. It's knowing as much as possible about the company, and that will give you the best educated understanding on what questions to ask for those gray areas that you're not able to uncover through your own research.
Thank you. Thank you very much, John and Jeremy. I think we had a very in-depth and good discussion on this, and I hope to continue that going forward. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All righty. So with that brings our panel to a close. I want to thank everyone in the room now for joining us. Thank you, of course, to Affinity for sponsoring and for sharing in this enlightening conversation. Also, a very special thanks to our speakers, to Julia, Jeremy, and John for their insights in this conversation. Last but not least, I want to thank my colleagues at WBR for helping to bring this webinar to you folks today. And very last thing is just please don't forget about that 1-minute survey. For anyone who did have a question, just please drop it in that Q&A box. We will send it off to the panelists and do our best to get that answered for you. Thanks again and have a great day, everybody.